Hi everybody. Today I would like to talk to you about Jimi Hendrix, one of the most influential guitar players of all time. As a guitar player for the first 10 years, I didn't know much about Jimi Hendrix, unfortunately. And once I stumbled upon his music, it was too different for me that I couldn't listen to it. But years later, I give it another shot and then I realized why it's so important. It's just you have to switch your point of view a little bit. If you're coming from a metal background, it's not very harsh, but at the same time, there are a lot of emotions in there. It's just expressed in a very different way. While researching his life, I decided to explain it to you in three parts. One of them is his early life, why he started music, etc. The mid section is the London period, where he started to get some recognition, released the first album, become a hit, and finally the US phase, where US was in turmoil and Jimi Hendrix was at the center of all that, and why it affected his music and his life. All right, here we go. Jimi Hendrix was born in 1942 in Seattle, Washington. One could say that he had a turbulent childhood. His parents were fighting often and eventually they got divorced. So he found escape in music. Jimmy got his first guitar at the age of 15. First a cheap acoustic guitar, but then he switched to an electric guitar, and that's when things started. Now the problem is he was left-handed, but he had a regular right-handed guitar. So instead of searching for a left-handed guitar, he flipped the guitar upside down, changed the strings, and it started playing. And from that key point, we can say that we already understood a lot about his personality, his rebelliousness, his resourcefulness, and also his unconventional style. In the early 1960s, he was already taking part in concerts. He was a backing guitarist for Little Richard and other various R&B bands. But the thing was, he was being heavily criticized because his performance was a little bit too much for that scene at the time. And some blues musicians were accusing him of distorting the blues. Despite his playing, he wasn't getting noticed. But that changed on 1966, where Linda Keith found him. Once she started listening to him, she immediately realized that he's going to be a star and introduced him to Chas Chandler. Back then he was the bass player of The Animals, but he was trying to become a manager. And together they formed the band called the Jimi Hendrix Experience. They decided to move to London because back then US was more traditional in terms of music, but London was the boiling pot of rock and roll. The Who, the Beatles, Rolling Stones, Cream. It was a very popular place and they were very receptive to new talent as well. So they moved to London and started recording their first album there. Are You Experienced? They stayed in London less than a year, and at the end of that duration, Jimi Hendrix was already a very famous musician. Almost overnight, radio started playing him, he started to tour around Europe, and also in the US, people started to know about him. They started listening to his music. It was called psychedelic 60s in the US back then. People were very much into drugs and there was Vietnam War. The society had a lot of things to say and Jimi Hendrix's sound resonated with the crowd very well. And that's one of the reasons why he got very famous. Now, if you're a guitar player, you know that Jimmy was a technical player. His playing was not about perfection, but it was about expression. In all its chaos while he was playing, you could find a melody, an emotion. He introduced us a lot of new techniques as well. He expanded the vocabulary of the guitar. He had given us the thumb technique from the top, an extreme bends, a different way of using the guitar. I'm gonna go ahead and say most of the fundamentals now rely upon Jimi Hendrix. So it's my opinion that if you want to become a good guitar player, we have to learn how to play Jimi Hendrix as well. This is a commonly debated topic also among my friends. I want to address something. If you are a pure metal player, maybe you have less things to pick up from him. But at the same time, I'm not saying just study him for a year. Just pick up a couple of songs and try to understand what he's playing, how he's getting his tone, what exact technique he's using. And I'm sure the string skipping, string muting, and the dynamic playing is going to get better because that's what Jimi Hendrix is about. It's about expression. Nowadays, with high gain tones, with a lot of compressed sounds, compression pedals, we tend to lose that dynamic range while we play. That's why I believe Jimi Hendrix is really important for guitar players to study. Okay, let's get back to his life again. He was in London and he stayed there for a year, released his first album, and in that album we had hits like Hey Joe, Purple Haze, The Wind Cries Mary, Fire. Fire is less known, but I really like it. Yeah, as I said, he had become a huge success even in US. He went back to US, but it was a very turbulent time. There was a Vietnam War, civil rights movement was on its peak, and Jimmy found himself in the center of all these problems. He was not a political figure, but he was supporting the civil rights movement. His music resonated with the crowd, and his rebellious style was very popular among the people who were trying to find a new way of living and criticizing the war. He had become one of the voices of the protests, and he had this ability to unite people. In one of his concerts on the day where Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated, it was reported that people from both sides were in the concert and they were crying. He could harness their emotions and create an expression of the frustration and the anger. Also, he played the national anthem by his guitar in Woodstock Festival in 1969, and he was heavily criticized because of it. Some people said it was beautiful, some said he mocked the national anthem. But in his eyes, he was not mocking or trying to disrespect the national anthem. He was just expressing the frustration of the crowd, and that's why he said it was beautiful. But imagine yourself being in the center of all that attention. No matter what you do, you are being heavily criticized. And it must have been very problematic for him that he had been using more and more drugs, at first soft ones, but then he switched to hard drugs and combining it to alcohol. And so it was not a very healthy lifestyle, obviously. And unfortunately, in 1970, he found dead in a hotel room, asphyxiated in his own gastro flutes. It was a tragic loss because he was so young and he had been on stage for a couple of years only. But his influence still continues today. So why Jimi Hendrix is important? Because he didn't just play the guitar, he transformed it. He was not following the paths, he was creating new ones. He was the sound and the voice of the people who were trying to express themselves. He showed us that technique without soul is nothing, and music is a tool for personal expression and social connection. Thank you.